Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is a groundbreaking series that dives into the lives of people living in the last frontier. Each episode introduces you to colorful characters from around the state. Funding for Indie Alaska is provided in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. Catch the latest episodes at alaskapublic.org.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 13th of October. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your community and village. And you can do that easily by listening to NOAA Weather Radio, Marine VHF, or logging online to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. You can always call us on the weather info line, as many of you do, 800-472-0391. And during the day, find information on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. In the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing, of course. That'll get you kind of a quick look at what's going on across all of Alaska during the afternoon. Okay, here's a look out in the Bering Sea, where we like to start up our satellite pictures, and several things are happening here that are not directly going to affect Alaska. We have two streams in the jet stream flow right now. One of those is on a northerly path and another is on a more southerly path, and that is steering a lot of the weather out and away from Alaska. So watch the flow here, and you can see a wave of low pressure here south of the Kamchatka Peninsula that is guiding the next burst of moisture up to a ridge of high pressure, and then that's going to drop southward again. The one place that stands to probably be affected by this the most would be southeastern Alaska, so we'll be watching that carefully. But for right now, a lot of the very active weather is kind of splitting out and around Alaska. Here's a look at the Alaska satellite, and you can see that southeast has had, in recent days, a wave of low pressure tracking across the north, but now we're into some drier, more stable weather, at least for the next day or two, before the next round of moisture moves your way. But you can also see that split flow. Here is the southern extent of that, and it goes off the screen and then way out across the southern Aleutians. And if you watch carefully up north, here is that northern track moving right across the north slope, and even that seems to be quieting down. So we're kind of left in the doldrums right here in the middle, right in where there's not a whole lot going on. In fact, high pressure is trying to set up and squash a lot of the cloud chances and really cut back on the amount of precipitation for many locations. All that being said, there's still some sloppy leftovers going on around across the northern and western Gulf Coast, with waves actually moving from southeast to north and west, and occasionally that's going to bring in some rainfall across the southern coast. And that's what we've seen today, some light rainfall across parts of South Central and Prince William Sound. And of course, there's weak low pressure sitting right there. There's also a wave of low pressure just south of the Aleutians, and that has brought up the winds across some of the western parts of the chain up to gales. So even though the storm track isn't really our best friend right now, giving us any active weather, if you're ready for that or not, there's still plenty to talk about across Alaska because it is so big and because it is Alaska. Low pressure sitting right across the Alaska Range, in fact, is locking in some light rain up around the northern end of the Susitna Valley. In Northway, we've seen some light snow today, as well as areas from Barrow all the way down the Chukchi Coast to Cape Lisburne today. And on top of that, ice is filling in. We'll have more on that with a look at your sea ice edge in just a little bit. But as a look at the UAF radar today and reports from people on the ground in Barrow saying they could literally watch the ice freeze up in front of their eyeballs today. So winter is coming whether you like it or not. Across the west, you'll notice some pockets of snow showers possible tonight. A wave of low pressure is actually working from east to west and trying to round the open space there that high pressure has carved out over the Bering. And as it does that, it is creating some clouds and a few areas of light rain and snow showers there, mainly along the west coast. A better chance for developing snow showers across the northern coast there, as well as areas along the Beaufort, and some light rain will be possible across northern parts of southeast as well as the northern Gulf Coast, including the Kenai Peninsula, some of which is moving through the Anchorage and Matanuska valleys as we speak. As we get into Wednesday, a look out west shows you there is a stronger storm trying to build in, and that will keep the winds going across the western chain. So expect gales out there with high pressure across the northern Bering. And once again, warmer air is lifting northward into the Gulf and then moving a little bit further westward. So the waves are a little bit stronger in the eastern Gulf, and by the time they get to the west, they're kind of starting to fall apart, not entirely dead just yet. But you can see that they're grazing parts of southeast on Wednesday, and that'll bring in warmer weather for you. And then another wave of rain working into the northern and western coast as we get into Wednesday night and Thursday. And then here's a stronger storm in the Gulf at 987 millibars. This will bring the winds back up across parts of southeast as we get into Thursday. It should increase the winds across the northern and western Gulf. And if you've got flying plans there, especially at lower levels, you'll probably start to see some turbulence developing with this across the northern and western Gulf into the Shelikof Strait region, as well as the Barren Islands, and anything moving through southeast will be affected by stronger winds in that region as well, probably some lower level wind shear. Out across the central and western Gulf, watch for clouds to part. In fact, maybe even a partly sunny day expected on Thursday there, with a little bit of morning fog and high pressure across the western Brooks Range. Looks like a pretty nice day. Out across the western Bering and the west coast, a little bit of a clear sky from time to time. As this wave starts to approach, those clouds will pick up. And then out to the west, here comes that storm working across the central chain. Winds will diminish in the west, switch around in the central chain, and probably come up to gales for a while, and then start to recede as we get back toward Friday and Saturday. Here's a look at current temperatures then today. Upper 40s and lower 50s for most of southeast. A little bit milder down to the south, where that warmer air has built in and rain has happened in the north, so that's kept temperatures down. Yakutat made it to 46, while Juneau was in the upper 40s as well. Prince William Sound in the mid to upper 40s, with Seward at 49, 49 in Homer, and 48 in Kenai today. Anchorage saw 49 degrees, while Talkeetna was only 36. As you get up the road toward Healy and Greeley, temperatures were in the 30s, 32 around Fairbanks today, 25 in Fort Yukon, 34 in both Yukon and Eagle. It was 19 in Arctic Village and about 28 degrees around Bettles, with 30 in Ambler. Teens and 20s for the Arctic coast. Barrow again with ice forming right there close to town at 25 degrees. AKwx was a cooler 21. Teens for Prudhoe Bay and Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse with 28 degrees around Kaktovik. 31 as you head down the shore toward the Cape Lisburn area and Point Hope and Point Lay. 32 in Kivalina. 31 for Kotzebue, and 37 today in Nome. Galena was showing 33 degrees. Grayling was 36. Around Anvik about the same. 41 for Bethel. And a look toward Bristol Bay shows temperatures were in the mid to upper 40s, with Lake Iliamna at 46. Lower 40s for St. Paul and St. George, and upper 30s to mid 40s for parts of the Alaska Peninsula, with Kodiak chalking up to 50 degrees today. A beautiful day there. And mid 40s for the central and western chain this afternoon. Now, overnight low temperatures should stay mild and above freezing for a large part of southwest, south central, and southeastern Alaska, of course, in the lower 40s. Close to 40 for Kodiak, and lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula as well as the chain. For the North Slope, expect overnight lows in the teens to mid-20s. Some of the coldest spots will be around Prudhoe Bay and Anaktuvik Pass once again. Ambler and Bettles both in the teens and 20s, and Fairbanks you're looking at about 26. With a high tomorrow of 40 though, that doesn't sound too bad. 24 around Anaktuvik Pass, 20s and 30s for the Arctic coast. Some areas actually getting very close to that freezing point. 36 in Nome, southwest, looking at highs in the lower 40s to almost 50 degrees around Bristol Bay and Kodiak and the southern tip of the peninsula. Around Sand Point looks like 50 degrees, with Dutch Harbor and Unalaska also close to 50 degrees. South central, upper 40s tomorrow, and southeast, upper 40s to some places even in the lower 50s around Ketchikan, Metlakatla, and Annette. Now, for the northern Gulf, expect MVFR conditions for most areas. It's going to be a mix of low clouds and passing rainfall. A few occasional areas around Prince William Sound and the Wrangell-St. Elias region may reach into IFR, but by and large, anywhere that's having restrictions may only go over to MVFR conditions. And that goes all the way through the Chukchi Coast, through the Bering Strait, and the western chain tomorrow, and areas closer to Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, but south and east of the Pribilofs. Here's your pass conditions then. We do see some improvement chances for AKwx and Adigan Pass tomorrow, both heading for VFR conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass may see MVFR conditions throughout your Wednesday, and Rainy Pass should see improvement during the morning, probably leaning over toward MVFR during the day. We expect similar trends there for Windy Pass during your afternoon. Isabel Pass, we expect to start at instrument flight rule with some improvement during the daytime, and Mentasta Pass should also see visual flight rule through the afternoon. As we get into the afternoon for Tenita Pass, we'll start out at IFR, but conditions should be A-OK by the afternoon. And for, looks like Portage Pass, probably heading toward IFR, with more clouds building in during the day and building up, with the next wave of rainfall moving across the northern Gulf. Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see some improvement during the day. IFR conditions, though, to start, again, thanks to the moisture buildup across some of the more north and eastern mountains. Freezing levels show the surface freezing line has dropped all the way down toward the Alaska Range. You just can't quite make it into the Kenai Mountains right now, though. It's still hovering north of most of the rougher terrain there in southeast and holding north, actually, of the Bering Strait. Now, the warmer air aloft has dropped southward. Remember, we've had those two split flows, one across the north and one across the south. The more southern feature is keeping the warm air from really lifting northward in any great way. But across the southern parts of southeast and southwestern Alaska, you can see the levels there as high as 2,000 to 4,000 feet as you look at your Wednesday. Now, icing potential is pretty hit and miss. There are pockets of moisture there, generally above 2,000 feet in the north, above 10,000 feet in the west with that approaching system. And across the Gulf, you're seeing levels above 5 to as high as 7,000 feet for maybe some isolated moderate across the northern Gulf and around the Kodiak Island region. Not a whole lot to write home about, but across the northern Gulf would be the one to watch. The jet stream showing that split flow. You can see that across the Arctic coast as well as areas across the North Pacific. Wind speeds there from 90 to 140 knots. And then we get that stronger south and easterly flow still wrapping across the eastern Gulf. That's keeping moisture moving northward across the Panhandle, but keeping most of Alaska kind of out of the active storm area right now. At 9,000 feet, you can see a somewhat similar pattern there. You've got more of that south and westerly flow developing ahead of the next wave in the western chain. Wind speeds go light across the northern Bering and then pick up again across the central and western interior, around 20 to 25 knots. Winds are fairly light across Bristol Bay at 10 knots and more of a northeasterly flow moving away from the Pribilofs at 10 knots. And here's our ridge of high pressure across southeast. Wind speeds there south of Haida Gwaii come up to about 40 knots, but slow down considerably moving over southeast. At 3,000 feet, you see our westerly flow moving across the Arctic coast, about 10 to 25 knots, a little bit stronger right along the coast itself. Our ridge of high pressure across the eastern Gulf at 30 to as high as 50 knots there south of Haida Gwaii. Once again, and winds are lighter across the Panhandle itself. Light winds across south central and the interior, and high pressures controlling the weather for the west coast and the YK Delta with wind speeds only at 5 knots. Picking up a little bit more across the central and eastern chain, and there's the approaching system again in the west, driving wind speeds up to about 30 to 40 knots. So most areas around Alaska are seeing pretty light winds at this point. Turbulence then, not a very widespread problem tomorrow. We'll see isolated, moderate, maybe light conditions there just offshore around the Chukchi Sea and the Beaufort Seacoast, below 4,000 feet, let's say. For the central and eastern chain, and maybe as far east as Nikolsky, and maybe even Dutch Harbor on Alaska, below 4,000 feet. A little bit better chance for some occasional moderate across the western chain, and then hit and miss across the northern Gulf. As those waves move from southeast to north and west, we should expect a little more turbulence moving toward the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island region as we head toward the mid to latter parts of the week. That's a look at your aviation forecast. In just a few minutes, I'll be back with a look at sea surface temperatures and the ice edge, as well as the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Cherry.
And I'm Forrest Kirst, a commercial pilot.
And today we're going to talk about an experiment we're doing using a small aircraft where we've mounted a sensor package to the aircraft to measure temperature, humidity, and pressure, as well as elevation and longitude and latitude of the airplane. And with the package, we're going to sample the local winter inversion here in Fairbanks, Alaska. And an inversion is where you have the surface atmosphere that's closest to the land is colder than the atmosphere above it, which is the opposite of normal conditions throughout the year throughout North America. Forrest, maybe you could tell us more about how a pilot experiences an inversion during the wintertime.
On the ground during our pre-flight, it's very cold out this morning. It's minus 28 centigrade, which is about minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So doing our pre-flight, it's extremely cold, hard on the airplane, hard on the people. For flying at the colder temperatures for doing these experiments, we're somewhere between minus 20 and minus 40 degrees. So we have to dress for that temperature inside the airplane as well as when we're outside of the airplane. When we're doing our pre-flight, we have to be extremely careful not to damage the plastic parts on the outside of the airplane. Extremely careful not to touch the metal parts with our fingers because we'll get contact frostbite. And we have to be real careful just with everything because it's just so cold. We have to dress as if we're going to be outdoors the whole time, and we use the aircraft heater to make it comfortable in our clothes and so we can see out the window. When we get the airplane running and we do our takeoff roll, we have increased engine performance and increased lift because of the colder, denser air. So we get off the ground earlier and have a better climb rate. When we reach the inversion layer, quite often the windows will fog up. The airplane's performance will decrease slightly because it's warmer air, produces less lift, and it produces less power from the engine.
When an inversion is present, air doesn't move anywhere, especially it doesn't want to move up. And so the classic look there is the steam out of the power plant or automobile exhaust, any kind of wood smoke or such, will come out of a chimney and then just flatten out and not move up. And if it moves horizontally at all, it's very slow, just creeping along. When you see that kind of lack of air movement, especially when there's clear skies, the sun is maybe low on the horizon, that is an inversion day in interior Alaska.
The reason it is so cool in the far north during winter is that the incoming radiation is at such a low angle. Now, as the atmosphere begins to cool in late fall, we start to get snowfall, which causes the land surface to be white, and light colors reflect incoming radiation right back, which causes additional cooling. And it's the reason we have a persistent inversion from late fall through early spring here in Fairbanks.
To get a radiation inversion to form, you need clear or mostly clear skies. You need no wind or very little wind down at the surface. And you need to have the sun under the horizon or high noon in December such that even if the sun is up, it's so low it doesn't really feed in any energy. When those three things happen, you lose heat to space from the surface of the Earth, but you're not getting any new heat in. And you get a very cold layer of air hugging the ground, cold, dense air that just lays down in the bottom of the valley. That's the classic radiation inversion setup.
So as we do our experiment with the aircraft, we're going to use a similar instrumentation package as is mounted on the standard weather balloons. We're going to measure temperature profiles, relative humidity, and pressure. And we're also going to tie the sensor package into a GPS unit, a global positioning system unit, so we know where the aircraft is located relative to the topography. So now I want to tell you about the instrument package that we're using on the aircraft. First of all, we use a NiCad 12-volt battery to power the data logger and the instruments. The data logger records the output from the meteorological sensors, which here include a temperature and relative humidity sensor and a pressure transmitter, which works like a barometer to measure atmospheric pressure. This particular one is going to plug into the static port in the aircraft, which also helps power some of the aircraft instruments. Finally, we have the global positioning system computer, which measures the latitude, longitude, and altitude of the aircraft. This one has an accuracy of about 10 meters, which is perfectly fine for what we're trying to do here. Here's a picture of our temperature and relative humidity sensor installed on the aircraft. So this is an FAA-approved plate here mounted to the window. And we want the temperature sensor mounted towards the aft of the aircraft so we don't get air rushing in and it has a chance to equilibrate to the environmental conditions. And then finally, our pressure sensor is connected to this static port in the airplane, which again just measures the ambient pressure of the atmosphere where it hits this little hole in the plane. That's piped back into our pressure sensor inside. So one of the things that we're going to go out and do today is that we're going to attach the sensor package to the aircraft, and then Forrest is going to take off from Fairbanks International.
To get repeatability for the data, we flew in and out of Fairbanks International, Nenana Airport, Ladd Army Airfield, and Eielson Airfield. So we do a very slow climb up through the inversion layer, climbing at about 100 feet per minute. Just very slow climb to the top of the inversion, find out where the ceiling is, and then once we're at the ceiling of the inversion, we do very slow porpoising up and down through the inversion to see if it's stable, if it's got different characteristics throughout it. Then we get to the next airport and we do a very slow descent into the airport at about 100 feet per minute, all the way to the ground.
I'd porpoise here in between the weather segments too while you're not looking. It's not pretty. Here's a look at what's going on with sea surface temperatures. The cold air is massing around the Beaufort Sea coast, and so is the cold water. And because of that, the ice is gradually filling in across that open water area north of the Beaufort Sea coast. That is filling in actually a little bit faster than it was just last week. But folks watching the UAF ice radar today in Barrow could actually see ice just sort of appear on the radar today. It was pretty cool stuff. And if you were standing in Barrow looking out at the water, you could actually see white spreading across the water, as we're told. So things are changing even before our eyes, and that colder air is taking over, and so is the cold water. Here is a look at the sea ice edge, and all the areas in white are 80% concentrations or higher. So this is ice, and it is expanding now west of Barrow, and we expect that to continue as the ocean currents and temperatures are showing us that that trend should certainly continue. The areas shaded in blue are about 20 to 80% concentration, so not quite as thick, but that huge open area that was just north and east of Barrow is tightening up there, and things are changing. Weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php for the very latest sea ice information there. Be sure and check that out if you haven't in a while. Looking at southeast, you can see light northerlies coming down the Lynn Canal, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. Light south and easterly winds on the inside coast there, around 15 knots with a 3-foot sea, and southeasterlies coming up the outside, 20 knots with seas ranging from about 7 to 8 feet on Wednesday. You see a little bit of a stronger shift there on Thursday. Winds pick up offshore, blowing 40 knots with 14 to 15-foot seas in the north. South and easterlies a little bit further down toward the Dixon entrance and Sitka at 30 to 35. Northerlies strengthen in the Lynn Canal to 20 knots, and southeasterlies in the Clarence Strait at 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Across South Central, look for northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet at 15 knots, picking up to 25 knots into Shelikof Strait. And we'll also see east and southeasterly winds around Prince William Sound and the northwestern Gulf from 20 to 25 knots with seas from 7 to 8 feet. Stronger flows across the north and western Gulf Coast there at 35 knots on Thursday. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound. Not much of a change from Cook Inlet down through Shelikof as we get into Thursday. Seas ranging from 4 to as high as 10 feet though in Shelikof, with seas up to 10 to 12 feet in the north and western Gulf. For the Alaska Peninsula, light northeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay, a little bit higher than normal at 20 knots with a 3-foot sea. Easterlies across the North Pacific and across the Alaska Peninsula at 25 knots with 7 to 8-foot seas there on Wednesday. See a little bit of a northeasterly shift on Thursday, still blowing offshore from Bristol Bay at 20 knots, 6-foot seas down the coast, and 8 to 11-foot seas there for the Pacific coast along the Alaska Peninsula from Castle Cape to Chignik. That's 35 knots with an 11-foot sea. Northerlies for the central and eastern chain on Wednesday. You're looking at 20 to 30 knots there with 8 to 10-foot seas out in the west. Southeasterly flow bringing winds up to 30 to 35 knots with 8 to 10-foot seas there, becoming 25 knots on Thursday with a 15-foot sea. Winds coming in from the south. A westerly flow from Kiska to Adak with an 8-foot sea there. And south and easterly winds continue for the central and eastern chain. You're looking at easterlies north of Unalaska and south and easterlies from Nikolsky to Adak at 20 to as strong as 30 knots south of the chain. 8-foot seas there are possible for Thursday. For the west coast, north and easterly winds moving offshore 15 knots for most areas, 20 knots around the St. Paul and St. George regions. 7-foot seas expected there on Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, an easterly flow cutting across St. Lawrence Island is expected at 15 knots. Northerlies coming down the YK coast and Nunivak Island, with northeasterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim Bay region, 20 knots there with a 4-foot sea. Those easterlies develop across the Pribilofs with a 5-foot sea there. A little bit higher seas around St. Matthew with winds up to 25 knots. And for the north coast, look for a westerly flow from Point Lay to Barrow, Wainwright, Prudhoe Bay, and Dead Horse and Kaktovik, all looking at 15 to 25 knots, though there's a much better chance you'll see some heavy freezing spray there from Barrow all the way to Kaktovik. Heavy freezing spray warnings are posted for your region. A west and southwesterly flow for the Chukchi Sea, looking at 10 to 15 knots, 20 knots maybe around Cape Lisburn and Point Hope. Those winds diminish a little bit on Thursday with the stronger winds moving north. A southwesterly flow there at 20 knots going up to Barrow and Point Lay. 4-foot seas there with freezing spray still a possibility for the Beaufort Sea. Look for seas up to 4 to 6 feet by Thursday afternoon. Winds around 20. Now for tonight, pockets of snow showers are possible across the west into Norton Sound, Unalakleet, and out across the Chukchi Seacoast. A better chance organized around low pressure just north of the slope. And we'll see snow showers developing across the Yukon, a better chance for very light and passing rainfall across south central and northern sections of southeast where it has already been raining today. Waves of warmer air will move across the Gulf from southeast to north and west, moving against high pressure sitting in the Bering that is expected to reach about 1,021 millibars as we get into tomorrow. That should delay the arrival of a storm system that is strengthening out across the western Bering, where the winds will stay focused on the western chain as we get into Wednesday and Thursday with gales expected there. High pressure sitting across the central and eastern parts of the Panhandle should keep another nice day on tap for most and southeast for Wednesday. Meanwhile, a stronger storm is building across the central Gulf that reaches 987 millibars by Thursday and will continue tracking to the north and west, heading for Kodiak Island in the Alaska Peninsula with another wave of rain for the north and western Gulf, as well as parts of central and northern sections of southeast. Winds will strengthen there, and nice weather continues for the central and northern parts of the interior. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.